It was a quiet evening, and the golden glow of the setting sun spilled through the sheer curtains in Emma's living room. The light danced softly on the walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. She sat alone on the worn-out sofa, holding an old photograph in her hands. It was one of her and Alex, taken years ago during a trip to the countryside. Their smiles in the picture radiated happiness, a stark contrast to the heavy emptiness she now felt in her chest. Emma's gaze lingered on Alex's face, frozen in time within the photo. "I never thought life would turn out like this," she murmured, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of how much had changed since Alex was gone. It wasn't just the absence of his presence. It was the loss of the life they had planned together. The dinners they would never share, the laughter that no longer echoed in their home, and the dreams that now felt like fragments of a forgotten story. On the table in front of her sat a small shoebox, faded with age. Emma hesitated before reaching for it. It had been years since she'd last opened it. Inside were pieces of their history: concert tickets, a pressed flower from one of their walks, and little notes Alex used to leave for her. She smiled faintly, feeling the familiar pang of nostalgia as her fingers brushed over each item. But as she dug deeper, her hand landed on something unfamiliar. It was an envelope, its edges slightly crumpled, with her name written on the front in Alex's handwriting. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. How had this been in the box all these years without her noticing? Her heart began to race as she carefully picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, and the sight of it brought a fresh wave of emotion. For a moment, she sat there, paralyzed by the weight of what it might contain. Finally, she tore it open, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a neatly folded letter. The words on the page seemed to leap out at her as her eyes scanned them. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means there's something I never got to tell you." Her hands gripped the letter tightly as she read on. Alex had written about the things they had never discussed, the fears he'd kept hidden, the love he had always felt, but perhaps never expressed enough. He wrote of their shared memories, their dreams, and his hope that she would never give up on herself, even if he wasn't there to remind her. At the end of the letter, one line stood out, etched into her mind. "Go to the place where we made our first promise. There's something waiting for you." Emma's thoughts spiraled as the words repeated in her head. The place where they made their first promise. She knew exactly where that was. It was the small park on the outskirts of town, beneath the old oak tree where they had spent countless evenings talking about their future. Her heart ached at the thought of going back there, but at the same time, a flicker of curiosity ignited within her. What could Alex have left for her? Why had he written this? The warm glow of the evening sun faded as Emma sat there, staring at the letter. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a note. It was a call to action, a chance to uncover something she had missed, perhaps even a chance to find closure. For years, she had lived in a haze of regret, letting the past weigh her down. But now, with this letter in her hands, she felt a glimmer of hope, fragile but undeniable. Emma stood up, clutching the letter tightly. She didn't know what awaited her at the park or what Alex had meant by something waiting for you. But for the first time in years, she felt compelled to find out. Whatever it was, she knew she couldn't ignore it. It was as though Alex's voice was urging her forward, and she decided to listen. The next morning, Emma awoke with a sense of unease, her mind still wrapped around the words in Alex's letter. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the piece of paper, as sunlight poured through the window, bathing the room in a soft, golden light. For years, she had avoided revisiting the places that held memories of Alex. The thought of walking through that park again, standing under the oak tree, felt like peeling back a bandage on a wound that had never fully healed. But something about the letter stirred her, giving her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She folded it carefully, tucking it into her purse before grabbing her keys. The streets were quiet as she drove, the hum of the car engine the only sound accompanying her thoughts. Her mind replayed the last time she and Alex had been together at the park. They had been so happy then, or at least she thought they had. Now, she couldn't help but wonder if there had been something she had missed, something he hadn't said. The park came into view as she turned a corner, the familiar sight tugging at her heart. She parked her car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet bringing back memories she had tried so hard to bury. The oak tree stood tall in the distance, its sprawling branches casting dappled shadows on the ground. It looked the same as it always had, as if time had stopped here, even while her world had crumbled around her. Emma walked slowly, her footsteps hesitant, as if the ground itself might give way beneath her. As she approached the tree, her chest tightened. The last time she had stood here, Alex had taken her hands in his and promised her they would always face life's challenges together. She had smiled and made the same promise, not knowing how quickly life would test them. She reached the base of the tree and looked around, unsure of what she was expecting to find. The letter had said something was waiting for her, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Her fingers traced the rough bark of the tree as she leaned against it, closing her eyes for a moment. "What did you mean, Alex?" she whispered under her breath, the words carried away by a gentle breeze. As she stood there, something caught her attention, a faint carving etched into the bark, weathered by time but still visible. Her breath hitched as she recognized the initials. E+A. They had carved it together on one of their visits here, laughing as Alex insisted it would make their love eternal. Her fingers hovered over the letters, her heart aching with the weight of the memory. And then something else caught her eye, a small piece of paper tucked into a hollow in the tree. Her pulse quickened as she reached for it, carefully pulling it out. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was unmistakably Alex's. She unfolded it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words. "Emma, if you found this, it means you've made it back here. I'm sorry for everything I couldn't say when I should have. There's more you need to know, about us, about why I had to leave. But first, you need to follow the next step. Go to the place where we first danced. You'll find what you're looking for there." Emma stared at the note, her mind racing. The place where they first danced. It was the small community center where Alex had once pulled her into an impromptu waltz during a local fair. She had almost forgotten about that day, but now the memory came flooding back, vivid and bittersweet. Her grip on the paper tightened as a strange mix of emotions swirled within her: curiosity, hope, and a lingering sense of fear. What was Alex trying to tell her? Why had he left these messages, as if leading her on some kind of journey? She glanced back at the tree, as though searching for answers, but it offered none. The only thing she knew for certain was that she couldn't stop now. Alex's words had awakened something deep inside her, and she was determined to see this through, no matter where it led. Emma drove to the community center with her heart pounding, her mind replaying the words from Alex's second note. The drive felt longer than it should have, each turn in the road adding to her growing anticipation. The community center was just as she remembered it, a modest building surrounded by a small garden. Its white paint was now slightly faded, and the wooden steps creaked as she ascended them. She paused at the door, her hand hovering over the handle as memories of that day came rushing back. It had been years ago, during a summer fair. The room was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked pies. Alex had pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor, ignoring her protests that she didn't know how to dance. "Just follow my lead," he had said, spinning her around until she couldn't help but laugh. The memory brought a faint smile to her lips, though it quickly faded as she stepped inside the quiet building. The main hall was empty, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under her footsteps. The sunlight streaming through the windows cast long shadows on the walls, giving the space an almost ethereal quality. Emma stood in the center of the room, unsure of what to do next. Alex's note had said she would find what she was looking for here, but there was nothing out of the ordinary in sight. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the old piano in the corner, its polished surface gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Something about the piano drew her closer. As she approached, she noticed a small envelope resting on the bench. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked it up, her fingers trembling. It was addressed to her, just like the previous note. She hesitated for a moment, her heart racing, before carefully opening it. "Emma, you've come so far already, and I'm proud of you. This wasn't easy for me, but it was the only way to show you what I couldn't say. There's one more place you need to go, the spot where we made our biggest decision together. You know where it is." Emma's hands tightened around the letter as her mind raced to decipher Alex's words. The biggest decision they had made together? It could only mean one place. The cliffside overlooking the ocean, where Alex had proposed to her. Her heart ached at the memory. It had been one of the happiest moments of her life, and yet it was a place she hadn't returned to since everything fell apart. The weight of the letter in her hand felt heavier as she stood in the silent hall. Alex's words seemed to pull her forward, urging her to keep going. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about uncovering his secrets. This was about confronting her own fears and regrets. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. She left the community center with a newfound resolve, clutching the note as if it were a lifeline. The journey wasn't over yet, but something told her the next step would bring her closer to the answers she had been searching for. As she drove toward the cliffside, the sky began to shift, the golden hues of late afternoon fading into the soft glow of twilight. Each mile brought her closer to the place where it all began and, perhaps, where it all would end. As Emma approached the cliffside, the familiar salty scent of the ocean filled the air, carried by the gentle breeze that tugged at her hair. The narrow road twisted and turned, lined with wildflowers that swayed in the wind, their colors softened by the fading light of dusk. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her heart pounding as memories began to resurface. This was the place where Alex had knelt before her, holding a ring with trembling hands, and asked her to share a life with him. It had been a moment of pure joy, unmarred by the complications that would follow. She parked the car at the edge of the lot and stepped out, the cool air brushing against her skin. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below was steady and rhythmic, almost as if the ocean itself were whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. Emma stood still for a moment, letting the serenity of the scene wash over her. But beneath the calm surface of the ocean, she felt the storm of her own emotions brewing. This place was beautiful, yet it held a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. Slowly, she made her way toward the cliff's edge, her footsteps crunching against the gravel path. The view was breathtaking, the vast expanse of water stretching endlessly, meeting the horizon where the first stars of the evening began to appear. The oak bench where they had sat together that day came into view, weathered but still sturdy. As she approached, her eyes caught something unusual. A small wooden box resting on the seat, its lid slightly ajar. Emma hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. She knew it was Alex's doing, but what would she find inside? Was it another note? A final message? Or something that would answer the questions swirling in her mind since the first letter? Her hands shook as she reached for the box, the anticipation almost unbearable. Inside, she found a photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph was of the two of them, taken on this very cliffside. She remembered the day vividly. It had been windy, and Alex's hair was messy, but he had insisted on capturing the moment. Her fingers brushed over the photo as tears welled up in her eyes. Beneath it was the note, and as she unfolded it, she braced herself for whatever Alex had written. Emma, this is the last step. I've led you here because I needed you to remember everything. the good, the bad, and everything in between. I need you to know that leaving wasn't my choice, and it wasn't yours either. Life had its own plans for us, ones we couldn't control. But even though I'm gone, I don't want you to live with regret. You have always been stronger than you believe, and it's time for you to see that. Her tears began to fall as she read the next lines. I left this box here because it's not just about the past. It's about your future. Look beneath the bench. Emma lowered the letter, her heart racing again. She knelt down, peering under the bench, where she saw a small, sealed envelope taped securely to the underside. She pulled it free, her hands trembling. Inside was something she didn't expect, a letter addressed not to her, but to someone else. The name on the envelope made her freeze. It wasn't her name. It wasn't Alex's name. It was someone she didn't recognize, and for a moment, her mind struggled to process what this could mean. Why would Alex leave a letter for a stranger in the middle of this deeply personal journey? What connection could this person possibly have to their story? Emma stared at the envelope, the sound of the waves crashing below growing louder in her ears. She had come seeking answers, but now she was faced with more questions than ever. She couldn't turn back now. Whatever this was, it was the next piece of the puzzle Alex had left for her. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope, her heart racing as she began to read the words inside. Emma unfolded the letter with care, the faint scent of paper mixing with the crisp ocean air. Her eyes scanned the first line, and she froze. Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means Emma has found her way here. I've trusted her to deliver this to you because she's the only one who could. I hope you'll understand why. The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. Michael? Who was Michael? The confusion swirled in her mind, but she pressed on, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation. I know you might not remember me, or perhaps you do. Years ago, our paths crossed in ways neither of us fully understood. But what you need to know is that your kindness changed my life in a way I never told you about. You once told me to fight for what I loved, and because of you, I found the courage to love Emma with everything I had. Now I'm asking you for one last favor, to share what I never could. Emma's grip tightened on the letter. She felt as though the ground beneath her was shifting, the narrative of her own life twisting in ways she couldn't comprehend. Who was Michael to Alex? And why was she suddenly a part of this story? I didn't leave Emma because I wanted to, Michael. It was because I had to. There was something I couldn't face, something I never wanted her to know. But you can tell her when the time is right. You can explain what I couldn't. I've left it with you because I trust you to give her the truth. Her heart raced, the waves below sounding louder and more chaotic. She flipped to the next part of the letter, desperately searching for clarity. Emma, if you're reading this before Michael finds you, I'm sorry. I had hoped this would unfold differently. But life isn't neat, is it? You're stronger now than I ever imagined, and I know you'll find the answers you're looking for. Keep going. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. The letter ended abruptly, leaving her standing in stunned silence. Emma sank onto the bench, the photograph still clutched in her hand, her thoughts swirling in a tempest of confusion and pain. Who was Michael? And why did Alex leave him with the answers to the questions she had carried for so long? Why couldn't Alex have told her himself? She sat there, for what felt like an eternity, the waves continuing their rhythmic assault on the rocks below. Then, slowly, she folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. Her fingers brushed against her phone, and for a moment, she hesitated. Should she try to find this Michael? Could she even bear to hear whatever it was Alex had entrusted to him? With a deep breath, Emma pulled out her phone and began typing the name into a search engine. Her heart pounded as the results loaded, her hands trembling as she clicked on the first profile that seemed to fit. A picture of a man, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a soft smile, stared back at her. She didn't recognize him, but something about him felt familiar, like a fragment of Alex's life she had unknowingly brushed against. The question now wasn't whether she would contact him, it was whether she could handle the truth he might reveal. Emma stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the call button, torn between the fear of unraveling everything she thought she knew and the need to finally understand why Alex had left. Finally, she pressed the button, her breath hitching as the phone began to ring. The phone rang, each tone stretching longer than it should have, intensifying the knot in Emma's stomach. She clutched the device tightly, her other hand gripping the bench as though the solid wood might keep her grounded. After what felt like an eternity, a deep, steady voice answered. "Hello?" Emma hesitated, her throat dry, words caught somewhere between her mind and her mouth. "Hi, is this Michael?" she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, this is Michael. Who's speaking?" Her heart pounded. How could she explain? "My name is Emma. I don't know how to say this, but I found a letter from Alex. He mentioned you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Then, Michael's voice returned, softer, tinged with what sounded like a mix of surprise and caution. "Alex, I see. I wasn't sure if this day would ever come." Emma's grip on the phone tightened. "You knew him?" "How?" "He wrote that you might have answers. Please, I need to know what he meant. Why did he leave? What couldn't he tell me?" Michael sighed deeply, the sound carrying a weight that made Emma's chest tighten. "Emma, this isn't a conversation for the phone. If Alex wanted you to find me, there's a reason. Can you meet me? I'll explain everything, but it's not something I can sum up in a few words." Emma's instinct was to push back, to demand answers now, but something in Michael's tone stopped her. There was a gravity to his voice, an unspoken understanding that whatever Alex had entrusted to him, it was something that couldn't be rushed. "Where can we meet?" she asked, her voice shaking. "There's a cafe just off the main square in town, Harbor View. Do you know it?" "Yes, I know it," Emma replied, recognizing the name instantly. She had been there once with Alex, a lifetime ago. "Meet me there tomorrow at noon," Michael said. "And Emma, be prepared. There's a lot to unpack." The line went dead before she could respond. She stared at the phone, her hand trembling. Be prepared? For what? She felt a mixture of fear and hope, her mind swirling with possibilities. What could Michael possibly know about Alex that she didn't? What had Alex been hiding? Emma stayed on the cliffside for a while longer, the wind cooling her flushed skin. She thought about the journey Alex had sent her on, the breadcrumbs he had left behind, each one bringing her closer to the truth. But the truth, it seemed, wasn't something she could uncover on her own. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Emma rose from the bench, tucking the letter carefully back into her bag. Tomorrow, she would meet Michael, and with him, the answers Alex had left for her. Whatever lay ahead, Emma knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change forever. The next morning arrived with an uneasy stillness. Emma barely slept the night before, her thoughts consumed by the upcoming meeting with Michael. She dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her necklace in the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, the tired lines around her eyes telling the story of years of unanswered questions and sleepless nights. Today might finally bring clarity, or unravel everything she thought she knew about Alex and their life together. She arrived at Harbor View a little before noon, the air outside warm but crisp. The cafe was a quaint little spot nestled between a row of shops, its large windows offering a view of the bustling street outside. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the man she had only seen in a photograph the night before. In the corner of the cafe, near the window, a man sat with a cup of coffee in front of him, his gaze fixed outside as though lost in thought. He looked just like the picture. Kind eyes, slightly graying hair, and an air of quiet composure. Emma's heart pounded as she approached, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Michael?" she said softly, her voice barely audible over the low hum of conversation around them. He turned to face her, his expression shifting from surprise to something gentler. He stood and extended his hand. "You must be Emma," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Please sit down." Emma hesitated before taking the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She studied him, searching for any sign of familiarity, but he was a stranger to her. And yet, there was something about him, a calmness, a sincerity, that put her at ease. "Thank you for meeting me," she finally said, breaking the silence. "I don't even know where to start. Alex. He left these letters and they led me to you. He said you would have answers." Michael nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "I figured this day would come eventually. Alex and I met years ago, under circumstances that were complicated. But before I explain, I need you to know something, Emma. Whatever he didn't tell you, it wasn't because he didn't love you. He loved you more than anything." Emma swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with the beginnings of tears. "Then why? Why did he leave me? Why couldn't he tell me himself?" Michael sighed, leaning back in his chair as though preparing to lift a great weight. Alex was facing something he couldn't control, something he thought would break you if you knew. It wasn't just about fear, Emma. It was about protecting you. Her brow furrowed, confusion and frustration bubbling to the surface. "Protecting me from what?" Michael met her gaze, his expression filled with a mixture of sympathy and sadness. "From himself. Alex was sick, Emma. He found out shortly after you two got engaged. He had a rare condition, one that progressed faster than anyone expected. He didn't want you to watch him suffer, to see him fade away. So, he made the hardest decision of his life. He left, thinking it was the only way to spare you." The words hit Emma like a punch to the chest. She leaned back in her chair, her breath shallow as the weight of Michael's revelation settled over her. "He was sick?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "And he didn't tell me?" Michael nodded. He thought it was better this way. He wanted you to remember him as he was, not as someone struggling to hold on. Emma's tears fell freely now, her hands clutching the edges of the table. "I would have stayed," she said, her voice trembling. "I would have been there for him. Why didn't he trust me with that?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes filled with empathy. "He did trust you, Emma, but Alex was stubborn, and he thought he was doing the right thing. He didn't want to burden you with his pain. He wanted you to live your life fully, without the shadow of his illness." Emma wiped her tears, her mind spinning with a storm of emotions, grief, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because he made me promise," Michael replied. "He made me promise not to contact you unless you came looking for answers. He wanted it to be your choice, Emma. He didn't want to disrupt your life unless you were ready to know." Emma stared at the man sitting across from her, her world shifting in ways she hadn't expected. Alex had carried this secret to protect her, but it had also left her with years of unanswered questions and pain. Now, she finally had the truth, but it came with its own burden. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft, almost lost. Michael reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "Now, you decide what to do with it. Alex wanted you to move forward, Emma, to live a life full of love and courage. He didn't want this to hold you back." Emma sat there in silence, the weight of Michael's words settling over her. For the first time in years, she felt a strange sense of clarity, as though the fog that had clouded her life was beginning to lift. The journey Alex had sent her on wasn't just about uncovering his secret, it was about rediscovering herself. And now, she knew, it was time to take the next step. Emma left the cafe in a daze, her footsteps slow as she walked down the quiet street. The sun shone brightly, casting long shadows of trees swaying in the gentle breeze, but the world around her felt muted, distant. The truth Michael had revealed weighed heavily on her, filling the empty spaces Alex's departure had left in her heart, with both clarity and sorrow. She clutched her bag tightly, the letters from Alex safely tucked inside. For so long, she had carried anger, confusion, and grief over his disappearance. Now, that anger was melting away, replaced by an aching sadness she didn't know how to process. Alex hadn't abandoned her. He had sacrificed his own happiness for hers. But had it been the right choice? Did he ever truly know how much she would have wanted to stand by him, no matter how difficult it might have been? Emma wandered toward the park in the center of town, her legs carrying her instinctively to the bench where she and Alex had once sat together. She sank onto the wooden seat, the distant chatter of children playing and birds chirping blending into the background. She stared at her hands, turning over the events of the last few days in her mind. A part of her wanted to feel angry, to resent Alex for making such a monumental decision without her. But another part, the larger part, understood his actions, even if they left her with scars. He had loved her enough to protect her from the pain he thought would destroy her, even if it meant breaking his own heart in the process. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the photograph she had found at the cliffside. It was the two of them, smiling, their eyes alight with a joy that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She traced the edges of the picture with her thumb, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. Alex had been a part of her life in ways that no one else ever could be, and even though he was gone, his love still lingered. As she sat there, a new thought began to take shape in her mind. Alex's final wish wasn't just for her to understand his decision. It was for her to move forward, to live the life he had envisioned for her. But what did that life look like? She realized she didn't know. She had spent so many years trapped in grief, her world revolving around the question of why Alex had left, that she had forgotten how to imagine a future without him. For the first time, Emma let herself wonder, what did she want? Not as Alex's partner, not as the woman left behind, but as herself. What dreams had she set aside? What passions had she buried beneath the weight of her loss? The questions felt daunting, but they also carried a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was what Alex had meant all along. He hadn't just wanted her to understand the past. He wanted her to reclaim her future. Emma wiped away a tear, taking a deep breath as the breeze rustled through the trees. She stood slowly, clutching the photograph to her chest. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But she knew now that it was possible. She had carried Alex's love with her through the darkest times, and she would carry it still, as a source of strength rather than sorrow. With the sun warming her face, Emma began walking back toward her car. She didn't have all the answers, but she didn't need them, not yet. What mattered was that she had taken the first step, and for the first time in years, she felt ready to keep moving forward. The drive home felt different. The roads she had traveled countless times before now seemed unfamiliar, as if the world itself had shifted. Emma's mind buzzed with thoughts of Alex, Michael, and the journey she had embarked on over the past few days. Every piece of the puzzle she had uncovered brought clarity, but it also left her with new questions, questions she might never fully answer. When she arrived back at her apartment, the quiet felt heavier than usual. She set her bag down on the table and pulled out the letters and photograph, arranging them neatly in front of her. Sitting there, staring at the remnants of Alex's love and his carefully crafted trail of messages, she felt a tug at her heart. She realized that while Alex had given her the gift of closure, there was something else she needed to do. Emma reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Sarah's name. Her best friend had been there for her through the years of grief, always encouraging her to move forward, even when Emma resisted. She hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button. The phone rang twice before Sarah picked up. "Emma?" "Hey, it's been a while. How are you?" Sarah's voice was warm and familiar, a small comfort in the whirlwind of emotions Emma was navigating. "I'm better," Emma said, her voice steady but soft. "There's something I need to talk to you about. Are you free tonight?" "Of course," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Come over. I'll make us some tea." A couple of hours later, Emma sat on Sarah's cozy sofa, the letters spread out on the coffee table between them. Sarah listened intently as Emma recounted everything: Alex's letters, the places she visited, and her meeting with Michael. Emma's voice wavered at times, but as she spoke, she felt a sense of relief, as though sharing the story was helping her carry its weight. When she finished, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed in thought. "Emma, I don't even know what to say. Alex must have loved you so much to go through all of this for you. But how are you feeling now? I mean, really feeling?" Emma took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. "It's hard to explain. I feel lighter, I guess. For so long I thought he left because I wasn't enough or because I did something wrong. But now I know it wasn't about me at all. It was his way of protecting me, even if it broke both of us." Sarah reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Emma's. "You've been carrying this alone for so long. I'm glad you finally know the truth. But what now? What are you going to do with this?" Emma thought about the question, her mind returning to the cliffside, the cafe, and the park bench where she had faced her deepest fears. "I think it's time I stop looking back so much," she said, her voice firm. "Alex wanted me to live, to be happy. I've spent so many years holding on to the pain that I forgot how to dream about the future. I don't know what's next, but I want to figure it out." Sarah smiled, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "You've already taken the hardest step, Emma. Whatever comes next, you'll face it with the same courage that brought you here." Emma stayed a little longer, talking with Sarah about lighter things, movies, books, and plans for the weekend. When she finally left, she felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that opening up, letting people in, was part of moving forward. She didn't have to do it all on her own. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she held the photograph of her and Alex close. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, her voice steady and full of gratitude. "For everything." For the first time in a long time, Emma fell asleep with a sense of peace, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Tomorrow was a new day, and for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it. The following morning brought a quiet sense of renewal. Emma woke with sunlight streaming through her window, a soft warmth settling over her. For the first time in years, the day ahead didn't feel like something she had to endure. It felt like an opportunity, a blank page waiting to be written. She made herself a simple breakfast, the sound of the kettle boiling filling the silence in her small kitchen. As she sat at the table sipping her tea, her gaze fell on the letters Alex had left behind. They were still neatly stacked where she had placed them the night before. A faint smile touched her lips as she reached for the top one, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. These letters had changed everything, not just because of the truth they revealed, but because they had reignited something in her she thought she had lost: hope. After finishing her tea, Emma pulled out a notebook she hadn't used in years. Its pages were blank, save for a few scattered notes she had scribbled long ago. Ideas, dreams, and plans that had once felt important but had been abandoned in the wake of Alex's departure. She flipped through the pages, each one reminding her of the person she used to be, a person she now wanted to rediscover. Picking up a pen, Emma began to write. Her words came slowly at first, hesitant, but as the minutes passed, they began to flow freely. She wrote about her dreams, the places she wanted to visit, the things she wanted to learn, and the experiences she had put off for too long. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was a promise to herself, a declaration that she would no longer let grief dictate her life. As the morning turned into afternoon, Emma found herself thinking about Michael. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his connection with Alex, more to the story he had yet to share. And while she felt at peace with what she had learned so far, a small part of her was curious, hungry for more answers, for a deeper understanding of the man she had loved. Emma decided to reach out again. Picking up her phone, she scrolled to Michael's number and hesitated for only a moment before dialing. He answered on the second ring. "Emma," he said, his tone warm but surprised. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." "I hope I'm not bothering you," she replied. "I've just been thinking about everything you told me, and I realized I still have questions. There's so much I didn't know about Alex, and I feel like there's more you can tell me." Michael was quiet for a moment before responding. "I understand, and you're right. There's more. Alex was complicated. There were things he didn't share with anyone, even me, but I'll tell you everything I can." "Thank you," Emma said, relief washing over her. "When can we meet?" "Give me a day," Michael replied. "There are a few things I want to gather before we talk again. Let's meet at the same place, Harborview, tomorrow at noon." "Okay," Emma agreed, her curiosity sparking anew. "I'll see you then." After hanging up, she felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She had come so far already, but there was still a sense that the journey wasn't over. Alex's letters had given her closure, but perhaps Michael held the key to understanding the parts of Alex's life that she had never seen. That evening, Emma prepared herself for whatever lay ahead. She wasn't sure what answers Michael would bring or how they might shape her understanding of Alex and their love. But she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face whatever came next, no longer bound by fear or hesitation. Tomorrow, she would take another step forward, one more piece of the puzzle waiting to be uncovered. The next day, Emma arrived at Harborview just before noon, her heart steady but expectant. She clutched her bag close, feeling the reassuring weight of Alex's letters inside. The cafe was bustling with midday energy, friends chatting over coffee, laptops open on tables, and the soft clinking of plates and mugs in the background. But Emma's focus was on the familiar figure seated near the window, the same spot where they had spoken last time. Michael looked up as she approached, a faint smile crossing his face. "Emma," he greeted warmly, rising to shake her hand. "It's good to see you again." "You too," she replied, her voice steady, though her mind buzzed with questions. She took the seat across from him, her gaze searching his face for clues about the truths he might reveal today. Michael gestured to a small folder on the table. "I brought something that might help you understand more about Alex. I thought a lot about what to share and how much to say. I know this isn't easy for you." Emma nodded, her hands folding on the table. "Thank you. I need to know everything. Not knowing has been the hardest part." Michael leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Alex was a private person, even with those closest to him. When he first learned about his illness, he shut everyone out. I met him by chance at a support group. He didn't want to be there, and he certainly didn't want to talk about what he was going through. But something clicked between us, and over time, he opened up. Emma's heart ached at the thought of Alex going through something so isolating. "He never told me any of this," she said softly, more to herself than to Michael. "I know," Michael replied. "He struggled with it every day. He hated keeping secrets from you, but he thought he was protecting you. He carried so much guilt about leaving Emma. He would talk about you constantly, the way you laughed, the way you always saw the best in people. He said you were the brightest part of his life, and he couldn't bear the thought of you seeing him at his weakest. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she blinked them back, her chest tightening. I would have stayed. I would have been there for him, no matter what. Michael nodded. I know. And deep down, I think Alex knew that too. But he was stubborn. He thought he was sparing you from pain, even if it meant taking on all of it himself. He slid the folder across the table toward her. There's something else you should see. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside were handwritten notes, sketches, and what looked like journal entries. Her breath caught as she recognized Alex's handwriting. She picked up one of the pages, scanning the words with trembling hands. I miss her every day. I see her in everything. The sunrise, the books I read, even the way strangers smile at each other. Leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done, and some days I wonder if it was a mistake. But if she can live a full life, if she can find happiness again, maybe it will all be worth it. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over as she read. Each word felt like a window into Alex's mind, a glimpse of the love and torment he had carried. Alex wrote these during the last year of his life, Michael said quietly. He wanted you to know how much he loved you, even if he couldn't tell you in person. Emma looked up at Michael, her vision blurred by tears. Why didn't he ever send these to me? He couldn't, Michael said. He thought it would only make things harder for you. But he left them with me, hoping that someday, when you were ready, you'd find your way to them. Emma closed the folder, her hands resting on top of it. The weight of Alex's love and sacrifice settled over her like a blanket, heavy but comforting. She had spent years questioning his absence, his silence, and now she finally understood. Thank you, Michael, she said, her voice thick with emotion, for being there for him when I couldn't, and for giving me this. Michael reached across the table, resting a hand gently on hers. Alex trusted you to find your own way, Emma, and he trusted me to help when you were ready. I think he knew you'd find the strength to move forward. Emma nodded, wiping her tears. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the journey that had brought her here. Alex's story was no longer a mystery, and his love no longer felt like a shadow of what could have been. It was real, enduring, and it would always be a part of her. As she left the cafe, clutching the folder tightly, Emma felt the sunlight on her face and breathed deeply. Her steps felt lighter, her heart more open. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that she was finally ready to write. That evening, Emma sat in her living room with the folder Michael had given her spread out on the coffee table. The pages of Alex's journal, his sketches, and the fragments of thoughts he had left behind felt like pieces of a puzzle she was finally starting to put together. Each word she read revealed more of his heart, his struggles, his love for her, and his deep desire for her happiness. One entry caught her attention more than the others. It was dated a few months before his death, written in a handwriting slightly shakier than the rest. If Emma ever reads this, I want her to know one thing. None of this was her fault. She gave me the best years of my life. She made me believe in love, in hope, in something bigger than myself. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't, except for the pain I caused her by leaving. But I hope one day she'll understand why I did it, and I hope she'll find it in her heart to forgive me. Emma's tears fell freely as she traced the words with her fingers. Forgive him? She didn't need time to think about that. She had forgiven him the moment she understood why he had left. He had made the hardest choice imaginable, all in an effort to shield her from suffering. It wasn't what she would have chosen, but she could finally see it for what it was. An act of love. For hours, she pored over the notes, piecing together the man Alex had been, not just as her partner, but as someone who had faced unimaginable pain with quiet strength. By the time she finished, the ache in her chest had softened into something gentler, a bittersweet acceptance that felt like a step toward healing. The next morning, Emma woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She dressed and drove to the cliffside where Alex had proposed, carrying the folder and a small notebook she had started filling with her thoughts. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, the sky a pale blue that mirrored her mood, a mix of calm and possibility. Sitting on the same bench where Alex had left the photograph and his first letter, she pulled out her notebook and began to write. She wrote about her journey, about the love they had shared, and about the future she was beginning to see for herself. She didn't know exactly where life would take her, but she knew she wouldn't live in the shadow of the past anymore. When she finished, she folded one of the pages carefully and tucked it under the bench, right where Alex had left his letter for her. It wasn't for anyone in particular, just a message to the universe, a way of letting go and moving forward. Alex, I'll carry your love with me always. You've given me the strength to start again, to dream again. Thank you for everything. This is not the end. It's the beginning. Yours always, Emma. As she stood and looked out over the water, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. The waves crashed against the rocks below, steady and unchanging, a reminder that life, like the ocean, always moves forward. She turned and walked back to her car, the sun warm on her face. The future stretched out before her, vast and full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Emma was ready to embrace it. In the weeks that followed, Emma began to rebuild her life with a newfound sense of purpose. The pain of Alex's absence lingered, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it became a part of her story, something that shaped her but didn't define her. She found herself revisiting the dreams she had once abandoned, the passions she had buried under years of grief. One evening, Emma sat at her desk, her notebook open in front of her. The page was filled with plans. Some small, like taking a cooking class she had always talked about, and others more ambitious, like finally traveling to the places Alex had once dreamed of visiting with her. Writing had become a form of therapy, a way to explore her thoughts and chart her path forward. She had also started reconnecting with people she had distanced herself from over the years. Sarah had been a constant source of support, and Emma had made an effort to strengthen their friendship, sharing more of her journey and allowing herself to lean on someone else. It was a new feeling, opening up again, but it brought her a sense of comfort and connection she hadn't realized she had been missing. One day, while sorting through her belongings, Emma stumbled upon an old photo album tucked away in a box. As she flipped through the pages, memories of her time with Alex came rushing back. There were pictures of their first trip together, candid shots of Alex making her laugh, and even a few silly ones where they had dressed up for a costume party. Each photo told a story, and as Emma turned the pages, she smiled more than she cried. Toward the back of the album, she found a blank page. Without hesitation, she went to her desk and retrieved the photograph Alex had left for her on the cliffside. Carefully, she placed it on the page and wrote underneath it, "The beginning of everything, and the lesson of letting go." It felt right to honor their love in this way, not as something lost, but as something that had shaped her and would continue to guide her. Emma also found herself drawn back to the cliffside where Alex had proposed. She visited it often, not out of sadness, but to reflect and find peace. It had become a place of solace, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. On one of her visits, she noticed a young couple sitting on the bench where she had once sat, their laughter carried on the breeze. She smiled, watching them for a moment before walking to a quiet spot nearby. As she stood there, looking out over the water, she realized how much she had changed. The weight she had carried for so long had lifted, replaced by a quiet strength and a determination to live fully. Emma's journey wasn't over. It never truly would be. But she had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to find joy in the small moments, and to carry Alex's memory as a source of love and inspiration rather than pain. Life, she realized, wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about taking the lessons it offered and using them to shape a brighter, more hopeful future. And as she turned away from the ocean and began the walk back to her car, Emma knew she was ready for whatever came next. Her story was still unfolding, and for the first time in years, she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. As Emma continued moving forward, she found herself embracing a life that felt both new and deeply familiar. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping organize events and activities for people who had experienced loss. It was a quiet way of giving back, a way to channel the strength she had gained through her journey. The center became a second home for her, a place where she could connect with others and share her story when it felt right. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes of donated books for a literacy program, Emma found a tattered journal tucked between the pages of an old novel. The sight of it brought a wave of nostalgia. It reminded her of Alex's journal, the one Michael had shared with her. She ran her fingers over its worn cover before flipping through the blank pages, an idea forming in her mind. That evening, she sat at her desk, the journal open in front of her. She decided to use it to document the next phase of her life. It wouldn't be about Alex, though his memory would always be a part of it. Instead, it would be about her dreams, her goals, and the new experiences she wanted to embrace. It was a promise to herself, a commitment to live fully and unapologetically. Over the next few months, Emma filled the journal with thoughts, sketches, and plans. She started small, exploring her town, trying new recipes, and meeting new people at the community center. But as time went on, her dreams grew bolder. She signed up for a painting class, something she and Alex had once joked about doing together. She planned her first solo trip, choosing a coastal town that Alex had always wanted to visit, but never could. As she sat on a rocky beach during that trip, the salty breeze brushing against her skin, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. She opened the journal and wrote, "I thought my story ended when Alex left, but I was wrong. He showed me that love doesn't die. It transforms, becoming a part of who we are. He taught me to be brave, to face the unknown, and to believe in myself. This is my story now, and I'm finally ready to write it." Emma smiled as she closed the journal, her heart full of gratitude. For Alex, for the journey that had brought her here, and for the life that stretched out before her. When she returned home, her small apartment felt warmer, more inviting. She had begun to fill it with pieces of herself, paintings from her class, shells from the beach, and photos of places she had visited. It no longer felt like a space frozen in time. It was alive, vibrant, a reflection of who she was becoming. One day, as she stood in front of her bookshelf rearranging books, her eyes landed on the folder Michael had given her. She pulled it down, flipping through Alex's journal entries one last time. They no longer brought tears to her eyes. Instead, they filled her with a sense of connection, as though Alex's voice still guided her. She carefully placed the folder back on the shelf, running her hand over its spine. "Thank you, Alex," she whispered, a smile playing on her lips. "For everything." And with that, Emma turned toward the window, the golden light of sunset spilling into the room. Outside, the world waited, full of possibilities, and Emma was ready to meet them with an open heart. Her journey wasn't about rewriting the past anymore, it was about writing the future, one page at a time. Months turned into a year, and Emma's life continued to blossom in ways she hadn't imagined. Her days were no longer weighed down by questions or regrets. Instead, they were filled with purpose, curiosity, and quiet joy. She had built a routine that balanced her work at the community center, her personal growth, and her growing circle of friends. One afternoon, Emma was helping organize an art exhibition at the center, showcasing works from local artists, including some of her own pieces from the painting class. It was a bustling event, filled with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the solitude she had once known. As she stood near her display, a man approached her, admiring one of her paintings, a vibrant depiction of the cliffside where Alex had proposed. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "The colors, the emotion, it feels alive." Emma smiled, her heart steady as she replied, "Thank you. That place holds a lot of meaning for me." The man introduced himself as Mark, an art teacher who had recently moved to the area. They struck up an easy conversation, talking about art, the community, and their shared love for creativity. For the first time in years, Emma felt a spark of something she hadn't expected, a connection that felt natural, unforced. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Mark began spending time together. They went on walks, visited galleries, and talked about everything from their favorite books to their dreams for the future. Mark was kind, patient, and open, and Emma found herself drawn to his gentle presence. He didn't ask about her past right away, sensing there were parts of her story she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he focused on the present, encouraging her to explore the world with him. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the town square, Mark turned to her with a soft smile. "You're amazing. You know that? The way you see the world, the way you've embraced life. It's inspiring." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, but it was different from the bittersweet ache she had grown used to. It was light, hopeful, a feeling she hadn't realized she could experience again. She looked at Mark, her voice steady as she replied, "I've learned that life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It keeps moving, and we have to find the courage to move with it." As the months passed, their bond grew stronger. Emma shared her story with Mark piece by piece, and he listened without judgment, his understanding and empathy helping her to heal even further. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future with someone new, a future that honored Alex's memory while embracing the life she was building. One day, as they stood together on the cliffside, Emma took a deep breath and let the wind carry her words. "Alex taught me how to love, even when it's hard, and he gave me the strength to let go. I'll always carry him with me, but I think he'd be happy knowing I've found someone who makes me feel alive again." Mark took her hand, his grip gentle, yet firm. "I don't want to replace what you had with him, Emma. I just want to be here for you, however you need me." Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. She nodded, squeezing his hand as they stood together, the ocean stretching out before them. The journey that had started with Alex's letters had led her to this moment, a new chapter, a new beginning. Emma realized then that love didn't have to be limited to one person or one time in her life. It was infinite, evolving, capable of growing in ways she hadn't thought possible. And as she walked back from the cliffside hand in hand with Mark, she knew her story was far from over. It was just beginning.